Today's show is sponsored by Panoptica. Panoptica simplifies container deployment, monitoring, and security, protecting the entire application stack from build to runtime. Scalable across clusters and multi-cloud environments, Panoptica secures containers, serverless APIs, and Kubernetes with a unified view, reducing operational complexity and promoting collaboration by integrating with commonly used developer, SRE, and SecOps tools. Panoptica ensures compliance with regulatory mandates and CIS benchmarks for best practice conformity. Privacy teams can monitor API traffic and identify sensitive data while identifying open source components vulnerable to attacks that require patching. Proactively addressing security issues with Panoptica allows businesses to focus on mitigating critical risks and protecting their interest. Learn more about Panoptica today at panoptica.app. That's panoptica.app.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron usually does the Cloud News of the Week. Unfortunately, Aaron was out doing some traveling last week. He had some work travel to do and came down with whatever funk seems to be, kind of a regurgitation of the flu or maybe some sort of COVID or something has just wiped him out. So unfortunately, I'm doing the Cloud News of the Week. I guess not unfortunately, but just, changing things up a little bit. Good to be back with you all. Hope you're all doing well. I'm going to keep this fairly short. Not a ton of news this week. There's a couple of big events happening this week. VMware is having their VMware Explore, what used to be called VMworld event is going on. So there were some announcements that came out today. I'm recording this on Tuesday night. This show goes out on Wednesday morning. I've been out and about all day long. I've not had a chance to go through all of the announcements. I put the links in the show notes so you can dig into them. I did get a chance to do kind of a quick run through lots and lots of stuff around what they call sort of their cloud foundation, their NSX, vSAN technology. So a lot around their infrastructure. Got updates in terms of scalability, a lot of integration, it looks like, with NVIDIA, lots of links in the show notes. And then also a number of sort of incremental updates to the Tanzu platform around a couple of different things, both in terms of cost management for cloud, some application development stuff and so forth. But I apologize for not having dug into them. I'm actually recording this. Aaron gave me the wave the white flag about being sick. I was on a plane, so I'm recording this fairly late, and I have not done all of my homework, but did want to make sure the links were in there. A couple of other things regarding VMware. They did get regulatory sort of sign off and approval, or they did not. Broadcom did, both in the US as well as the UK. Those were sort of two of the last three major hurdles they needed in order to get sort of full sign off from all of the global regulatory agencies. The last one that's still outstanding is China. I don't have any sense of how long that one will take, but we've been quite a while in waiting for this to happen, and this is not unusual for two huge companies like this to merge. I mean, we're talking about $60+ billion, so very, very large acquisition. Lots of people need to sign off on it, make sure it's not anti-competitive, and whatever other sort of political trade-offs they need to make. So. But we will try and do some more analysis of the VMware Explore. It's weird to not call it VMworld event, but we'll get that for you probably in next week's Cloud News of the Week. A couple of other quick notes. Anybody who is big into Python or big into like what everybody likes to call everyman's sort of big data. They use Excel and huge Excel spreadsheets and use Excel for your analytics. Microsoft is bringing Python to Excel. I believe it's only in the cloud version of Excel, at least in the near term. But for anybody who is sort of a data scientist or a data scientist light, you do a lot of work in Excel, you will be getting Python fairly soon. So if you haven't gone and learned Python, now would be a good time to go about doing that. If you're doing stuff in macros and other sort of wizardry that people do with Excel, Python is now on your maybe on your Christmas list for the year. And then finally, we talked a little bit a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, about Instagram or Meta Threads, the alternative to Twitter. Took off like a rocket ship right at the beginning. We sort of got involved with it. We have an account over there. I feel like I haven't paid attention to it that much. It still feels like it's it feels like it's got some good things to it. It also feels like it's missing some really basic things like search and hashtags and stuff that we kind of expect from a Twitter clone. But just real quick, they are doing a number of updates next week. So if you haven't been paying attention to it, maybe you got an account early on, they are coming out with a web version of it as opposed to just a mobile version of it. I suspect they will also roll out a bunch of new features. So if you got on the Threads bandwagon right when it came out and maybe you've waned a little bit, haven't really paid attention to it, next week has got some big updates. So maybe take a look at that as well. So I'm going to kind of wrap up Cloud News of the Week. There wasn't a ton of stuff. The other thing that kicks off, I believe, tomorrow is the Google Next event. So sort of the Google Cloud event will be kicking off. That will be another one that we will be watching. It is good to have big in-person events back again, big keynote speeches, so we can get a sense of what's going on with companies, really good breakout sessions, all that kind of stuff. But that is kicking off, I believe, tomorrow, which would be Wednesday. So we don't have, other than some stuff from like Richard Seroter and some others who put out some good newsletter stuff, we don't have that covered for you because it's happening tomorrow. So we will try and make sure we cover that in next week's Cloud News of the Week. But anyways, hopefully Aaron will be back. Hopefully he's taking his meds, getting some rest, getting some fluids in him. He will be back for Cloud News of the Week next week. I will be back on Sunday to do Sunday Perspective. And coming up, we've got a great show really digging into kind of an alternative way of looking at event-based applications, streaming, kind of alternatives to Kafka with the folks at Memphis. So we'll be right back with that after the break. Is your cloud bill out of control? CloudZero is building a platform that will let you analyze your cloud investment faster than ever before. You'll get accurate, granular visibility into your total cloud spend without the typical pitfalls of legacy cloud cost management tools like endless tagging or clunky Kubernetes support. CloudZero is how cloud-driven companies gain more financial control and predictability by driving immediate and ongoing savings. You can answer questions like, how can I save 20% of my cloud bill right now? Who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? Join companies like Rapid7, Drift, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. Again, please visit cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today.
This episode is supported by the AWS Insiders podcast. AWS Insiders is a fast-paced, entertaining, and insightful look behind the scenes of AWS and cloud computing. I'm a subscriber to AWS Insiders, and I love Rahul and Hillary's practical analysis and interviews. As an F1 racing fan, the recent episode on how AWS and F1 partnered together to make the races more exciting was especially entertaining. Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to AWS Insiders for their support. And we're back, and we have a really interesting follow-up to another show we actually did recently. So in the streaming space, and more specifically Kafka and Kafka alternatives, there's been a lot of interest here lately from the listeners. And oh, by the way, out there, if you have ideas for shows, guests, topics, we always want to hear about that. But I have a fantastic guest this week. I have Yaniv Ben-Chemo, co-founder and CEO at Memphis.Dev. First of all, Yaniv, welcome to the show, and please tell everyone a little bit about your background and what brought you to create Memphis.Dev.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, Aaron, and thank you for having me in the show. So my name is Yaniv. A bit about myself. 30 years old, married with one kid. I always like to start with the personal life before getting into the development and programming and more technical stuff. So that's me. I started my career as a developer since I was like 10 years old. I've been a developer since all my life. A developer and a builder. Usually try to build something. Can be hardware or software. But usually I will be building something. I started my career as a developer, then in cloud architecture, and then I found my passion in data. So data architecture, data engineering, data analyst. I built a bunch of data platforms from fewer petabytes a month all the way to hundreds of petabytes a month in different enterprises across the globe. And then I found another passion called data streaming or real-time data. and to be more specific, a message broker, which I think one of the most fascinating components that we have in modern software architecture, because it can be stretched to so many use cases around the data domain. And yeah, so I found it highly fascinated as a builder, and I thought that the current, I would say, tools or technologies really didn't make a lot of sense for me as a developer and as a data engineer to work with. I found myself working most of the time tweaking and optimizing and working around the infrastructure and building wrappers around the message broker or the data streaming platform that I was using at that time, instead of concentrating on extracting value and building applications around it. So I decided to change that and build a modern one, an easier one, a message broker or a data streaming platform that would be able, or that would enable its users to concentrate on extracting value and do more with the data that has been transferred through the platform itself. That's me, and that's us.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And I'll just say this too. I've followed the streaming space, if you will, from afar for a while. Like, I have a data background as well. But it feels like the adoption of this isn't just increasing, but increasing exponentially, right? And it's a lot of like the ability to a just-in-time delivery model and doing things a lot faster. And it's an evolving architecture that is certainly worth following for everyone out there. But maybe let's start at the beginning, right? Because most folks will know Kafka. They will at least know of it and the uses for it. And so most folks might want to know, like, why a streaming alternative? Isn't Kafka good enough? What challenges did you encounter?
Right. So Kafka is definitely a very good product, a very well architected tool, I would say. So it's not necessarily just to become better. I think that the set of challenges that we put on the table when we started to think about the future solution or the future vision or where the market should go to in the coming years, I think that we placed different, I would say, different challenges than just a faster Kafka, a more efficient Kafka, a cheaper Kafka, than we usually hear when we scan or go across the different technologies that was built in the last several years. So I think that the challenges that we wanted to tackle when we looked at Kafka and other services in that area was, first of all, the ease of use. I think that even highly skilled organizations, with all the hands and all the teams that needed for that task, are able to work on that, it's still a very complicated piece of technology to work around. It requires a lot of knowledge and experience in both distributed architecture, in storage systems, in real-time data, and I think that that learning curve, that was like the initial challenge that we placed on the table. The second one was that if I'm a developer or if I'm a platform engineer in 2023, would it really make sense for modern teams and modern companies to build a dedicated team, which actually happens today, a dedicated team just to handle my organizational Kafka? I think that not. Moving forward from the day one issues of the infrastructure and scalability and maintenance and troubleshooting and all of those stuff, we also, within our team, within our one of my co-founders, Sveta, brings the data analyst and the data scientist point of view or perspective. At the end of the day, a message broker is all about, or event streaming platform is all about bringing data from different sources and and make them available for different interfaces and different consumers within the organization to consume and do something with it. The people that are responsible to do something with the data that is being collected usually needs to go to a whole different platforms, all different set of tools to do that. And it causes another issue, what we call the day two operations, the actual time when we need to do something with the data that we are collecting. It's right now there is a huge gap between these two personas, these two use cases or day-to-day job and knowledge and skills. And we also wanted to create a one giant full suite of streaming that would be able to serve both the data engineers with their profession and their requirements, and also the people that are less technical and required to do something with the data. And both of them meet each other at the same platform, which is what we built.
And so you bring up a great point when it comes to the people aspect of this, because in putting together the show topics for all of this, I definitely hit on day two operations and operations complexity, but we need people to manage all of this. And so, I'll ask this: what's maybe the biggest barrier to entry to building these systems? Is it a technical challenge in operations complexity, or is it a people problem? Like there, AI, ML, we always hear there's a shortage of data scientists. Is there a shortage of folks with data streaming platform experience as well?
For sure. So from both sides, right? Both the day one and the day two operations. So the day one operations, the maintenance and the operations aspect of the data streaming platform, the current data streaming platform, it requires a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of management overhead, and really, I would say, make or fill out the operations people. I would say 80% of their day or 70% of their day, based on the market research that we did on our initial development, solely goes to maintaining the platform itself. And the day two people, the day two personas that needs to do something with the data, right now they have tools that either force them to write in Java or to write in or to write in SQL. But not, what if my use case is not necessarily is able to be processed or transformed using SQL? What if I need to enrich it with some third-party API? What if I need to do some transformation that is much heavier than just a plain SQL join or a query? So all of those issues currently, I would say, with the current tools and the current landscape that we that is currently available in the market, I think that, or at least we know that, is really making hard for teams to progress. And definitely as data scales and the company grows and more data pours in and from different and more sources and more clients needs to consume that data, it brings up a very high barrier to work on that and to keep up the pace.
Nice. And let me shift gears for a second, because there's folks out there, some of our listeners will be relatively new to this space. Let's talk about the building blocks or the pieces, right? When you're talking about that day zero or day one experience of actually building up the systems. In reading through the docs, it mentions like there's differences between a broker and the streaming stack. And can you elaborate on the pieces of the puzzle, if you will, right? Like what components are typically needed for a proper data streaming solution?
Yeah, so I would say 3 layers. In Memphis, it's 4, but in general, it's probably 3 layers. So it's the broker itself, the thing that sort of the bridge of the data. Data comes in, data goes out. You have some producers that produce data in, and you have some consumers or subscribers, depend on which technology are you using, that collects the data from the other side. And then we have the entire world of schema enforcement and schema transformation. You have different tools for that. Today you have AWS Glue, and you have the famous Confluent schema registry. and Memphis offers an equally cutting edge technology or a feature for that as well called Schemaverse. And on top of that, that basically join the two together is the stream processing. So we have the broker, we have the transformation, and we have the processing. That's a fairly standard standard process of real-time data or real-time ingestion. And those would be the usual fundamental layers in every streaming platform.
Fantastic. Cool. Now, let's move on to, we've already talked about it a little bit, but operations complexity. Something I see pretty much, I mean, not just in data streaming platforms, but across the industry, right, is anything related to cloud native, it seems these days. The more you scale it, the more complex it gets. The more complex it is, the harder it is to operate it. And also, by the way, it's harder to get, insights. Like I hopefully this translates to an international audience, but the needle in the haystack, right? How do you find the needle in the haystack? How do you mine the data and get the insights out of this? Has this been your experience in this space as well? And what are some of the, I don't know, the easiest problems to solve when it comes to complexity?
So if we need to give that a one-word name, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, but it would be probably observability, right?
Yes.
It's all about observability for the ops people, observability for the developers, observability for the people that actually needs to work with the data. I think that within data, and not just cloud native, definitely cloud native and microservices, definitely, but there we have open telemetry and the different projects that has been raised by in the last couple of years that really gave us tools to solve their challenges, right? To understand like how data or our communication is going through the different microservices in our environment. And in data, it's a bit different. In data, it's not just seeing lines between producers and consumers. It's also to feel the data, to understand how the data looks like, the lineage of the data, so how it's been changed as it goes through different stations, and that's a whole different observability. And that was one of until today, and we do our best to tackle that. But until today, that is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have in microservices-based data pipelines, if you will, or a distributed data pipeline around the message broker or around our event streaming platform to really understand how data flows between the different stations, the different stages, and then when you have a good observability to that, then you are able to analyze the data properly and also to create the visualization that will probably come afterwards. But yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges today. We are working hard on solving that on our end.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, Yano. Thank you for that. And let's talk about use cases for a little while, right? Like we've been talking about architecture. Let's move into practical uses, right? Your organization has a product, Memphis Cloud. What problems are you trying to solve in the market? And tell everyone a little bit more about, like, is Memphis Cloud a SaaS offering, for instance, or how would it be implemented in an organization to help solve some of those people and complexity challenges we've been talking about?
Right. So when we started, we made a clear, or we defined a clear KPIs right from the start that is really intertwined with our value proposition, which at the beginning was to bring the most simple to use or the most easiest to use yet super robust data streaming platform in the world. So we wrote ourselves like a KPI that we constantly measure, which is how much time does it take for for a new user to start ingesting data into Memphis and actually start to produce insights or value out of it. And right now, or before the cloud, with our open source version, it was between 10 minutes to 50, which is great for a new product, definitely around the streaming world, where usually the entry barrier is really high and the learning curve is really hard. And right now, with Memphis Cloud, we're talking about minutes. So it really takes literally minutes from signing up, defining or configuring your account, and then actually start working and processing with data. So right now it's standing on an average of 7 minutes, which is great. And we're constantly working hard on making it shorter and making it easier. And definitely once the infrastructure or Kubernetes, because Memphis is a cloud native message broker or a cloud native data streaming platform, and once the infrastructure is also out of the way, that's a very easy product to use and to onboard to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And while I'm thinking through this, I my next thought comes to data management, right? Because if you're streaming it, you have to store it, you have to manage it. Anytime we talk about data, it can be a little problematic. How is the data managed? What's the security around it? There's, data sovereignty to consider. There's, like GDPR to consider. Like, how does data management fit into the life cycle of all of this? And what kind of design considerations do you have around data management?
Well, that's a broad topic.
Sure, it's probably its own podcast right there.
That's data management. I've been lecturing about that for so long through my time in Dell Technologies. So data management is definitely a very challenging aspect of things. Definitely when you insert into it the entire world of compliance and GDPR in either European data or US based data. So definitely a huge challenge there. I think that if you have a clear understanding of where your data will come from, then definitely you should build your strategy ahead and understand how to create sort of silos based on or close to where the data is located, and sort of create or understand what would be the bridge between the different silos in order for data to be able to travel across them, or at least replicate between them, either asynchronously or in active way. That's a huge challenge. I think that we are in general, like the market and the industry is reaching there out of necessity, which is, I think, the strongest force of nature, right? That would be like the foundations for that, but it's a very broad topic.
Yeah, fantastic. And, another talking point and last question, because we are coming up on time here. One other thing I think about when you're building these large distributed systems, I'm sure there's some kind of trade-offs, right? There's some kind of optimizations that, like you said earlier, one of the KPIs was minutes to, ingest data, if you will, right? And so for every one of those optimizations, sometimes there's trade-offs to happen and there's design decisions that have to happen. And so if somebody is new to this space and is considering this kind of solution, where do you recommend they get started of like, hey, you really need to know about this, or you need to be thinking about this when you're designing these systems?
The most interesting place in real time and streaming, usually we will start with batch processing because it's easier, because it's much more simple to manage, because it's much faster to build in terms of architecture and platform. So we usually start with batch. Now, the interesting part with the transitioning or the movement from batch to real time and streaming, and then all the ideas and thoughts about how to do it and how to build it really comes with or really comes out of your own struggles when you try to implement certain use cases that are not very well fitted with batch processing. Batch processing, by the way, for the audience, batch processing means to take a bunch of data in a static timing or in static timing, and just take a bulk of data and do some transformation on that bulk of data, pour it into some database or do the entire processing on top of a database, and not on the way between the source and destination. Doing something or processing or transformation between or on the fly between source and destination, that means streaming, and that means real time. So batch is like starting a job at 12 p.m., getting data out of a certain database, do something to that, and then pour it again to some other table or other database. That's batch. Now, usually, the need for real-time and streaming comes from certain actions or certain necessities from our use case that force us to think about streaming and think about real-time, and then there is no really rule of thumb of where should it start or where your journey with real-time and streaming should start. I would say it's more depend on the use case itself and how fast do you want to react to a certain data, to a certain event that happens, and what should be the trigger. Should it be based on time, or should it be based on creation or update of something? And then you understand, like you basically create your own path through the streaming world, and start to build your real-time pipelines. There is no, like the way I see it, there is no a specific book or a Udemy course that will tell you how to become like a streaming engineer, right, or something like that, or a streaming platform a specialist. I think that it's a developer that understands that there is certain use case, or they have certain use case that requires a fast response in the minute that something happens, and from there they basically starting to build a real time pipelines and real time processes or event driven architecture, and they are already on the track, and it's not necessarily through some course or learning material.
Makes sense. So yeah, that mirrors a lot of what we've seen with a lot of the newer technologies, right? The rest of the industry and even how you get started. And that's actually one of the origins of this podcast is like, we're always interested in emerging technology and we're always asking folks, how do you get started? And so that's super helpful. Actually, what I think we're going to do is we're kind of at time. So we're going to close out there. So Yaniv, where do you recommend, if they're interested in learning more about this, where do you recommend they go to get started?
Well, about the domain itself, like data streaming
the domain
in general.
Memphis, your technology in particular as well. We did put some links in the show notes, by the way, but I was just wondering from your personal take.
Thank you.
Where
Yeah,
do you recommend everyone as a first step?
I would say Udemy, definitely. My first steps at that domain was definitely a couple of Udemy courses, understanding the history a bit of the core technologies, started from RabbitMQ, different patterns, PubSub, and then push-based and pull-based consumption models, and then understand the core technologies through different, again, there are multiple courses around there through Coursera or Udemy, or couple of very interesting newsletters that usually creates very good materials to read. Also, I constantly follow for years after Seattle Data Guy. If you're familiar with the person, so it's basically a data engineer that is been working around all data stacks and all streaming stacks and write extensively about it through Medium and through Substack. So I highly recommend to follow some tech leaders there as well. And in Memphis, we constantly do our best to upload genuine educational materials for people that wants to onboard and start their journey with data, and specifically data engineering. So we have our newsletter, Dan. So it's a data engineering newsletter. And we also have our blog, which I'm not a huge fan of doing articles with Memphis is the best, Memphis is the greatest. I think it's not the very best way to publish your work and your company. So we do our best to put out materials that really helps the people to become better data engineers and developers around data. So those would be probably the sources that I would pick.
Fantastic. That's perfect. And just as a reminder for everyone, take a look at the show notes. We've got, of course, the main site in there, but we've got some getting started with Memphis. We've got Kafka versus Memphis. There's Memphis on GitHub if you're more interested in that. But everyone, take a look. I certainly encourage that. So, Yaniv, I'm going to close it out now. So very much thank you for your time. This is really super fascinating and super interesting. On behalf of Brian and myself, everyone that's out there, thank you for listening this week. And if you enjoy the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, if you can, we'd love a review. We'd love a 5-star review, but we would love a review as well. And with that, I'm going to close us out. Thanks everyone again for listening. And
thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for your time, Yaniv. And we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.